We were just at this event. Dennis Kucinich came out and spoke
for
RFK. He is their national campaign manager now.
Yeah, I think so.
And then
the very formal title is, but that's his job.
He's there. He's he was out there representing. You thought he did a good job, right?
I thought he did a really masterful job. Actually, they came at him from every which way with all kinds of questions. We're going to kick some of that stuff around ourselves, and he handled it very well. He was open with everyone, and when he was finished answering questions from the podium, he went out to, there was a crowd of maybe 150, 200 people there. He went walking around and talking to people face to face, and he did pretty well, I thought.
I was holding his glasses, his pens, and his keys. And he says, "Hold this for me while I speak." But when he was done, he grabbed the glasses, pens, and keys, and instead of going off to the side, he jumped off the front stage.
Yes, he did.
Right, and he jumped right into the crowd, and he started speaking to people, and people hit him with questions all over the place.
Yep.
One of the questions he got that I'm going to get an official statement was on Cuba. I'm not going to leak that, but when I get the official statement on Thursday, it's something to think about. But we're going to talk about that. But let's set the table for what's going on, because the biggest beef that we hear with RFK, especially from our crowd, let's just say we're the anti-imperialist left, right?
Yes.
That's the based leftists, the ones who didn't play into the culture wars, the ones who prioritize foreign policy is something very important because we can blow up the goddamn planet.
Right.
Some of us who are not really in the DNC anymore, we're persona non grata to those people for whatever reason. Some of us, because of the COVID reasons, we said enough is enough. The number one reason why people are giving RFK a hard time, Don, is because of the DNC lawsuit, the fraud case that you have some perspective on that I think is not spoken about. So we're going to start off by setting the table, because people say, Don, Bernie Sanders showed us, not so much Bernie Sanders, but this case with Jared Beck showed us that there's no such thing as a Democrat, that the Democrats can go into the back room full of cigar smoke and pick whoever they want, and there's no reason to send a dime to RFK because he's running as a Democrat. Your initial thoughts on that right away?
I mean, I've heard that argument, and first of all, I wasn't taken in by Bernie Sanders either.
No,
I was working, pretty much looking to see Trump take over the Republican Party and Sanders take over the Democratic Party, only not because I expect anything. See, people have unrealistic expectations of the political process here. The mythology that we're fed, excuse me, is that this is a republic, which means that we get to choose representatives who make decisions for us. And that implies that there is some sort of a system of choosing these representatives that ends up putting someone in who is actually a representative and not someone who's basically in charge of you. Like, here, this is going to be your boss. We let you pull those funny levers over there, but we chose this person. And that's who it is. In fact, we know that's how our system works. We didn't pick Hillary Clinton, and we didn't pick Donald Trump, and we didn't pick any of the people that the Republicans and Democrats have run for many, many years. They're picked and vetted, long before you ever hear of them. And then when they govern, other than you have the virtual governing that they do, and the arguments over virtual policy that take place, like we just saw with the debt limit. You have red shirts and blue shirt, cult members at each other's throats with a whole line of talking points about how important this is. Oh, our credit is going to be no good. My savings are going to be no good. My kid's going to be unemployed. It's the Republicans' fault. It's the Democrats' fault, et cetera, et cetera. Has nothing to do with what's actually going to go on. Whatever's going to happen with the federal budget's been decided long before you heard anything about it.
Okay.
And so that's how the whole political process actually works. There is a virtual process that you are supposed to be all in for, and you have a very polarized pair of groups that are all in, and they have nothing to do with choosing anyone or making any actual decisions. Those things happen entirely outside of that sphere. So when people are looking to Bernie Sanders or RFK or Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or anyone else to be a savior, that they're not going to be a savior. They can't be a savior. The job description doesn't include it. They can't do something. One example, when Trump got elected, one of the things he was elected for, this is one of the things that he promised, and one of the things that people that voted for him were looking for, was that he was going to try to de-escalate tensions with Russia, China, and some of the other, adversaries, quote unquote, that we have out in the world. And that included trying to get away from this regime of sanctions and of escalating war games and all kinds of other things. So he got elected despite, the best efforts of just about everyone else in the country. And you would think that would give him a mandate to at least try some of the things that he promised. He taught in the heat of the campaign, there was an allegation that became a drama, that became a melodrama, that became a Netflix series with a daily update. Russia hacked the election. Russia basically has a puppet in the White House, and et cetera, et cetera. Russia is our enemy. You had Nadler and Schumer and every other knucklehead in Washington that the Democrats could push out Pelosi, saying in essence, this was an Adam Schiff for brains. This was an act of war.
Yeah.
What's her name in New Hampshire? Shanine also said that, with a body count, no less. Even Joe Stein sued in Wisconsin to try to overturn the outcome, which would have had the effect of giving Wisconsin to Clinton and perhaps putting Clinton in the White House. All of these things happened around a myth, as we found out if you've actually read the Durham report, and if you actually read, in fact, critically, the Mueller report. There was no takeover of the government by Russia. There was there's nothing, none of that. However, a great deal of governing took place that's outside of what the framers set up in the Constitution. Foreign policy is supposed to be the purview of the executive branch.
Mm-hmm.
The State Department is in the executive branch. The diplomatic corps is in the executive branch. The military is in the executive branch. The right to go to war is with the Congress, but the operation of it is with the executive.
Yeah.
The intelligence agencies are supposed to be with the executive. It turns out the executive is with the intelligence agencies. So as Trump starts to stake out or make noises like he's going to stake out a foreign policy, the three places where there was the most tension over the previous 8 years with the Obama administration and the previous 8 years with the Bush administration, which in fact ended up being, if you look at it in retrospect, a bipartisan policy consensus, was Russia is the enemy, North Korea is the enemy, Iran is the enemy. And so and Trump starts negotiating with Korea. What we call North Korea is actually Korea. What we call South Korea is actually Japan-occupied Korea since the late 20s, early 30s. It's just now the Americans are there because the Americans occupied Japan.
Exactly.
So whatever Japan occupied is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you get that picture. So, Trump is announcing, we're going to sit down with North Korea. We're going to make a deal with Iran. We're getting rid of that other deal that stinks, and we're going to sit down with Putin even if sometime early next year and try to work out our problems there. Congress, outside of its authority, proposes legislation to tie the president's hands with respect to foreign policy, saying you, number one, cannot undo any of the sanctions that were implemented by Congress before without our authority, and we are now taking charge of any sanctions that were implemented by the executive, by executive order, so that you can't remove them either without us approving it. And the vote on that, you have 435 members of the House of Representatives and 100 members of the Senate. There's 535 people. There were 11 votes against. Now, in order to override a veto, you need a 2/3 vote in each of the two chambers. So you need 66 senators, 67 senators, and whatever 2/3 of 435 is. So it's 3 something. it was clear that no matter what Trump did, he was not going to have the authority to conduct foreign policy with Russia, Iran, or North Korea. Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of thing that goes on in the background. People have no idea this is happening. They see that the legislation is there. Oh, well, Iran is our enemy, North Korea is our enemy, Russia is our enemy. Yeah. Congress is, just tightening the screws a little more. They've been tightening the screws since 1960 with Cuba and whatever. So we're used to that, and the world hasn't blown up yet, so there's no problem. And by the way, as everybody knows, and they say on TV every 30 seconds, Trump sucks. So don't worry about it. He's crazy.
Yeah.
This is the real administration. What goes on television is the virtual administration. And so when people are discussing what they're going to do in a campaign, you have to understand that what's going to be done when they become presidents is quite different from what they're going to do.
Okay.
And that's the point I wanted to make with that one thing.
Okay, so let's talk about the DNC lawsuit case, because you're right. I mean, it's totally different when, and that's the thing I keep saying. I'm not telling you to support RFK. I'm not telling you to vote for RFK. I'm not telling you to send money to RFK. I think there's a bigger picture here, and I will get to that in the second section, because the argument now is like, all right, Don, so you say all those things. What really happens behind the scenes? Then what happens on the front of the scenes? Why should we donate to a candidate then? And with this case with Bernie Sanders, and you explained this to me beautifully, because from what Jared Beck says is, if you believe in this shit, you should believe in professional wrestling, being real wrestling. If you want to go, his wife said, if you want to go watch a puppet show, go watch a puppet show, but you ain't got to pay a high price for it. Right. So what was the main point that people are missing with this DNC lawsuit case? Because I think it's a little bit different, because a lot of people that we know, smart people who have been around, friends of ours are going to be on Misty's show tonight. I'm sure we'll talk about this. They showed that it's all a fraud, that it's a puppet show, that it's professional wrestling. What's the main point that people are missing with this whole DNC lawsuit case? I don't know if we can pull it up here, but you have the video of Bernie, but maybe you could just explain it and explain to people the main thing they're missing when it comes to this DNC lawsuit case and how Bernie aided in the whole situation.
Okay. So you had a primary process in 2016. I don't know, maybe I should people know what the primaries are, but maybe it'd be nice to give it a quick review. You have, the two major political parties, for lack of better term. It's the popular terminology anyway. Mm-hmm. It's not terminology, by the way, that the court uses when they refer to this process, as including the Supreme Court. But that's what people know, and that's what they call this circus. Mm-hmm. Each of those parties and the other parties have a method of selecting a candidate for various offices. The process for doing these things, first of all, is a child of state law in general. Also, however, provided for in the U.S. Constitution with respect to federal offices. The presidential election, for example, actually people don't really elect the president. They elect the people that elect the president. There's that electoral college is actually a set of representatives that you elected when you pulled the lever for, McCain, Obama, Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, whatever. You didn't actually give them a vote. You gave a vote to someone that promised when they have a vote in this collection of delegates, they're going to vote for the person that you told them to vote for, at least on the first ballot. And depending on what state they're in, because the mechanism for this varies from state to state and is under the U.S. Constitution a creature of the state legislature. There's Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution describes the process for the president and says that the delegate shall be selected in a manner determined by the legislators of the several states. In other words, the state legislature. Yeah. So whatever that is, before you get, this is what happens with the candidates that are out for office. In other words, the Democrats have someone, the Republicans have someone, whoever else, the Greens, Libertarians, et cetera, et cetera. You go in and pull a lever. you're really pulling a lever for somebody that's going to go in and pull a lever
for a delegate.
For a delegate.
That's why the whole thing with super delegate was delegates. We elect the delegates. Super delegates is the party would pick the person to go thing. So we were so uber focused on, we got to get rid of the super delegates and everything will be fine. Please continue. Sorry.
So that's all right. So in the primary process, it resembles this process that's in the general election. And so, we're not going to get 1,100 votes to 900 votes, Bernie Sanders to Hillary Clinton, aggregate that kind of a win across, every county in the country or every state or every jurisdiction, whatever, and then just total all the votes up for Sanders and total all the votes up for Clinton, and whoever has the most wins. Nothing to do with that.
Nothing.
Okay. And in addition to that, all right. So what you're doing instead is voting for someone who on the first ballot or the first three ballots,
vote for the guy you say,
for the one, and then after that they can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And so that's where people try to get. By the way, when you go in there as one of these delegates, and we're talking about district leaders, municipal officials, all of the crooks that you have to pay off during the course of your daily life, the building inspector, the judge with the speeding ticket, whatever the hell it is. They're also the ones picking the presidential candidates, just so you can feel confident in them. So this process is not only that bad, just in case you accidentally vote for some delegates who accidentally choose someone they don't want. Here's the group of delegates that can be voted for by you and everyone else in the state. Here's like another 40% delegates who nobody votes for. They're mine. I'm sending them in the room and they're going to do what I tell them. And so when there's a vote between Sanders and Clinton loses or wins by 10%, and here's 30% more votes, I decide who the candidate is, no matter what all the rest of you did.
Those were the super
That's
delegates.
what a super delegate is.
Yeah.
Okay. So they had rules that they published. This is the Democratic National Committee. Everyone conceives of them as sort of like an executive committee of something that they conceive of as the Democratic Party. In fact, the Democratic Party does not exist. This is a label, a logo that belongs to a group of people who use it state by state by state as the label for the ballot line that they got by petitioning or by caucus or by whatever method in a particular state is used to select candidates. And so when you are listening to someone say, hi, I'm from the DNC, we're going to be conducting a national series of primaries to pick our candidate, and we would like it if you would pick a candidate that you support, get engaged in the process. Don't forget they're going to ask you for some money. We need your help to make this thing happen. Get out your checkbook, put in a bunch of 100 hours or whatever to carry petitions, go talk to your neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. What they really mean, according to the court, is that we're going to do whatever the F we want.
Yeah.
You have no recourse. And if you give us money, we're going to do what we want with that too. And if you sue us, you're going to find out something that Jared Beck and his clients found out in 2016 and 17, and as recently as 2020, when they filed a certiorari with the Supreme Court to have their case reviewed. And that was this.
That was the Wilding case, right?
Yes, Wilding v. DNC. What's her name? Deborah
Wasserman
Schultz.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Yeah, her. Yep, and others. Here was the theory under that case. We are all people who were looking at the 2016 election with concern. We saw and read the bylaws of the Democratic National Committee and saw them promise publicly that they were going to conduct an open and fair process for selecting the candidate through primaries. No one was going to put their finger on the scale. And based on these promises, people gave up, months of their time,
A
and
lot of their checkbooks too, buddy.
and a couple of $100 million.
Yeah. No shit.
So then there are leaks through WikiLeaks and through what was Gossamer 2.0, whatever that was, wherever that came from.
Guccifer?
Yeah, Guccifer.
I think Guccifer was a CIA, but mostly through
Right.
WikiLeaks,
But
definitely.
they said it was Russians, and of course it turns out not to have been true.
Of course.
So they found out, in fact, that the process was very, very heavily weighted.
They were tipping the scale. They were talking about how do we use his Jewishness against him? How do we do all this bullshit?
Stuff,
yes.
all kinds of. So they found this out, said, hey, wait a minute. We coughed up $200-something million. I've been out there since the end of 2015, shaking hands, getting signatures, conducting town hall meetings, going into, conducting letters to the editor campaigns and all the things you do when you're involved in a political campaign, because we thought Bernie Sanders, who we decided to support based on who he said he was, we wanted to see him become the candidate. And we did all this and paid all this and everything and found out, in fact, he didn't have a chance because the process had already determined that Clinton was going to be the president. It's just that's not the process I was participating in. I was just funding it. They had their own process behind closed doors that they conducted, and they used it against us and against Sanders and against the people in general because they picked Hillary Clinton no matter what anybody in the country wanted. And this, by the way, in the face of polling that showed after they beat Trump up for a year on every media platform possible, that she was as unpopular as him or worse after $1 billion of PR materials. Yeah. And yet this is who they were going to force. So
Hillary, fire, Hillary.
Yeah,
Sorry,
right.
my bad.
That's right. So
I know you remember that too.
Okay, I do. Yeah. So an example. I went to the DNC. I went to the RNC and the DNC in 2016, like I usually do. And we were talking to people, and the first group of people I spoke with was the first night that I got to the state. It's like the basketball stadium in Philadelphia, the Wells Fargo Center, I think it's called, whatever it is. It's typical like Madison Square Garden or Felt Forum, whatever. Whatever it's called.
They're calling it the choke stadium after the 76ers lost to the I'm sorry, my bad. Had to throw that out to any Philadelphia fans. But please continue. We're going to get to the good point. It's getting better right here, ladies and gentlemen.
So
we're paying attention to your stuff in the chat. We're going to address what Bill Bradley says. He's got some great questions for you. But please.
Bill Bradley.
Senator Bill Bradley. Dollar Bill Bradley. But Bill, we're going to put your stuff up here because Don's about to get to your point. We've been talking about this all day. So please.
All right. So here we go. So they find out that, in fact, that the whole thing is very crooked. And they file a lawsuit, I believe, in June on behalf of a class of contributors to the Sanders campaign, saying, in essence, we were fraudulently induced into forking over $200 and some odd million dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I need damages. I thought it was Ukraine for a second. I'm sorry. Yeah. We fraud in the inducement is, it's actionable, and it's also depending on the jurisdiction. And this was federal in the Florida district, and so we want treble damages. In other words, not only do we want our $220 million back, or whatever the number was, we also want an additional $660 million back as punitive damages for them doing this wrong thing, this tort.
Time is money.
It, right?
You lied and wasted our time, Don. We want to get compensated. Go ahead.
So what I found out, like, for example, this is what I was going for a minute. When I got to the convention in Philadelphia, the first group of people I met in the first evening were a group of Sanders delegates that had walked out already. They came pouring it. We were in like the ring road on the inside of the arena, outside the main arena, like where the bathrooms and vendors and stuff were. That's where the media was set up. Mm-hmm. And I was there with Pacifica Radio, and they were conducting interviews with people that were at the delegates at the convention. And a lot of it was like, oh, won't it be great? Hillary Clinton will be our first woman president and all this kind of stuff.
Glass ceilings.
Yeah. That was like the substance of the conversation that was going on Alan, I forgot his name. He used to be the manager at KPFK. Anyway, long story short, if it's not too late for that, the delegates came over and they explained to us some of the problems they had because they were being told already that they need to get in line and support Hillary Clinton. And this one guy told me, for example, look, I worked a district just in northwest suburbs outside Chicago. And he said, whatever the number of signatures you needed from that district to get Bernie on the ballot, he did, tens of thousands of signatures, whatever it was. And he said, and out of the group, he said, I was the head of a petitioning group, but about half or more of those people I met personally and spoke with. And the main reason they were so willing to sign the petition was they wanted to see Hillary Clinton not be president of the United States. He said, I cannot now go back to those people and tell them they have to vote for Hillary Clinton or else they're going to get Donald Trump for president. They'll string me up. This is a problem that was confronting them.
Deservingly so.
Okay. And so, but the thing is, the point of that is this process that people thought was, I'm going to put my back into it. I'm going to put my money into it. I'm going to put my reputation into it. I'm going to do all these things, was actually fixed from the beginning. Okay. So the lawsuit is filed. It says, we were defrauded. They misrepresented to us this process would be fair. It wasn't obviously fair. And based on their misrepresentation, based on this fraud, we were induced into coming up with the money. We want the money back. We want punitive damages.
Gotcha.
So now this lawsuit is pending during the DNC, and the essence of that suit is that the fraud that you guys committed was in the delegate selection process.
Mm-hmm.
Since the delegate selection process is what governs who the candidate is, there was never a chance of the guy who we were supporting to help him become candidate actually become a candidate. And so because of that, we were defrauded. And we gave our money under false
This
pretenses.
is where it gets interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Listen up now. This is important.
So they sue, and there's some interesting things about that from the beginning when they served process on Deborah Wasserman Schultz. And
let's not get sidetracked on that. That's a good one.
But that we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And then, you serve a summons and a complaint. The summons says you have to come before the court by so-and-so date, whether it's physically or with papers or whatever.
Yeah.
And the complaint is, here's our case. I'm this person. I have this interest in this controversy. Here's the controversy. Here are my claims. This is what I want from the court. That's in essence what's in the complaint. That gets served. The party that you're suing has a certain amount of time, 30, 45, 60 days, and you can get extensions to answer it. First of all, come into court. Here I am, or here's my papers. That's called an answer. And then there's counterclaims. We claim this we deny it. We say instead that's an affirmative defense. And so that kind of paper stuff was also being traded while the DNC is going on. And pending at the time of the DNC was a claim, part of the boilerplate, part of like there's a ritual both sides go through. You have to say these magic words. You have to put these magic answers in, or the court's going to say, oops, you forgot the magic answer. Go away. You lose the case. And these are rituals that are steeped in antiquity. Is that how they say it? And one of them is that the idea that, and this is actually not just a ritual, it's a substantive issue. In order for the court to be able to have jurisdiction over you, in order for the court to be able to deal with you and to make you do things or to penalize you or whatever, you have to have notice. You have to be served with notice that this case is actually pending, so you have a chance to be involved in the case, to answer whatever claims there are, to face your accuser, all of this.
In other words, you don't get served. You're not responsible to show up in court.
This is called due process. Without proper service, there's no due process. Without due process, there's no jurisdiction. The court can't do anything to you. They have no power over you. So when the papers first got served by the people who got screwed out of the money they claimed
Mm-hmm.
on the DNC, the people they claimed screwed them out of the money, and particularly
Jared Beck's staff.
Jared Beck's staff person over here
Yep.
allegedly went to Deborah Wasserman Schultz's office. Deborah Wasserman Schultz sent somebody downstairs or outside or whatever to take the papers, brought them in, and then when they were working up their response, one of the first items was, by the way, we were never properly served. Deborah is the defendant.
Yeah.
They served, Mary, the secretary, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so what that does is get set aside for like a trial, more or less, on what really happened.
Yeah.
Well, while that was pending, that might have allowed the suit to go forward, the outcome of that.
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Sanders gets up, and do we have that queued?
I think we do. Let me see if I can.
To me, that's it.
I think this is it, because this is the important thing, because this is going on, guys.
How long is this?
I think this is it here.
Yeah, right. Okay. Is my mic on too? Or is it?
This is not it. No,
This is it. It's coming.
it's coming.
Yeah.
All right. Let me. Yeah.
further.
All right. So I'm not even where we're at here. Let me
All right.
share this here.
Yeah.
Add this to the stream. We're off to the side. I'm gonna, guys, do us a favor. Hit the like and the share button, because this is the important part right now. All right. I'm gonna just drop this stuff for 2 seconds. I'm gonna get it on a full screen. We'll be right down in the corner. Take a look. It's coming, right?
Yeah, it's coming. This is Bernie Sanders at the convention, right here, right there. This is the end of the convention. Here he goes. And then I'll explain what it actually means after you see it. This is him.
This is very important, guys.
Yeah.
This is brother.
What you don't see.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I move that the convention suspend the procedural rules. I move that all votes cast by delegates be reflected in the official record. And I move that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
Okay, now what just happened? It sounds like what he said was, let's call the vote.
Yeah.
And since the vote was in favor of Hillary, I'm the generous, realistic guy saying, let's just formalize what has already happened and make her the nominee.
In other words, by acclamation.
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
In other words, so it looks like you had the primaries. They picked the delegates. The delegates voted. We're going to show the vote count. Hillary won the vote count. Let's make her the candidate. That's what it sounded like happened.
Yes, that's what it sounded like to me. Yeah.
Here's what actually happened. This pending lawsuit, if it was successful, also sought to have the delegate count set aside and some mechanism for having the delegate vote reflect the actual political reality that Sanders really won California, a couple of other states in the primary, recut the delegates, then vote for the candidate. In other words, Sanders could win this way.
Yeah.
What he just did was say, oh, yeah, okay, we got a vote count. Go ahead, put that in the record. However, let's all pick Hillary Clinton as the candidate.
Sorry, I'm going to make sure.
And when he did that, Hillary became the candidate not by the delegate vote, but by acclamation, by him saying, let's all, who wants her? He didn't even do an aye and nay. He just said, let's make her the candidate. And everybody said, yay!
And that's it.
That.
So in other words, they bypassed the delegate process,
exactly,
which is what the DNC lawsuit was about. So
therefore,
they couldn't. It made the case moot because he did it by acclamation, and Bernie Sanders actually participated in this thing. He did it. He was the Pied Piper. So when Bill Bradley made a statement is that Bernie Sanders should have joined the lawsuit in case, and I was saying, wait a second.
They should have sued Bernie Sanders.
We should have sued Bernie Sanders.
Along with, he should have been one of the parties defendants in that lawsuit.
Exactly. For what happened was Bernie Sanders bent the knee and made that case moot because they didn't go by the delegation process anymore. And by not going through the delegation process and duping us all.
It doesn't matter if it was crooked or not. And then we found out, of course, I mean, in the defense that the DNC and Wasserman Schultz, their papers, their defense was, as a matter of fact, first of all, there is no Democratic Party. You just because you enroll as a Democrat doesn't mean you have any right at whatsoever to determine what goes on with this group who run this private enterprise where they can make up the rules however they want. There is no governing law that says they have to do it this way, that way, or any other way. And so if they were to admit to you that they did everything you accused them of, it's not actionable. And so what Bernie did was, in case the court didn't decide that, and in case the court, if they were able to survive the challenge, they challenged on these different procedural questions, standing, just different things that. There's a lot of magical nonsense that goes on in the court system here. So again, some of it is like legacy from English law and courts and whatever. Some of it is novel and really, really actually pretty evil. One is the idea that if someone does a public wrong, you can't sue them for it if it affects everyone. If somebody opens a factory that threatens the life of every person on earth, none of us can sue to make them stop. I have to have an injury
that is specific to you.
That's specific to me. That's differentiated from the public at large. And so they were saying, look, you call yourself a Democrat, but you're just a voter or just an American. What these guys did might have been bad, but it doesn't affect you any differently than it affects everybody else. And so therefore go away. You have no right to be here in court.
That is the crux of everything. And that's why I said, what responsibility does Bernie Sanders bear in this whole situation? I didn't understand that until we watched it and you saw it. And you know what? I'm going to do it really quickly again.
I saw it it happened.
You did. There, Well, I'm going to play it again really quickly, just so people understand. And just listen to what he's saying, because what he's doing is bypassing the process that needs to take place. He bypassed it. DC, sue the burn, he says.
Too late now, I bet. I mean, I don't know, but I bet this.
Whatever statute of limitations is
whatever. I don't
but know. Watch what Bernie Sanders says again.
Thank you.
Brothers and sisters.
Madam Chair, I move that the convention suspend the procedural rules.
All right.
I move that all votes.
The procedural rules call for a delegate vote and then a nomination based on the delegate vote. And he's calling to suspend that.
What are the procedural rules, Kate? One more time.
Here's the delegate vote.
Yes.
Okay. We have a vote. I move that the vote be, whatever. I mean, I don't know exactly what the procedure is after that, but it involves ratifying or memorializing or adopting the delegate vote.
Yes.
And so
he suspended it.
He
moved it. And of course the DNC and Hillary's going to be like, okay, approved.
So the selection of the candidate, in other words,
wasn't through the delegates.
It was not through the delegates. It was through this thing you're about to see next. And therefore, anyone suing saying that the process of selecting delegates was crooked, that suit was rendered moot by his action here.
Right here.
Because the delegates had nothing to do with selecting the candidate.
One more time.
Madam Chair, I move that the convention suspend the procedural rules. I move that all votes cast by delegates be reflected in the official record. And I move that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
Now, by the vote being entered into the official record, what it means in practical terms is not that, and so this person is chosen as a candidate as the fruit of that vote. Rather, what it means is whatever we're about to do to select her, if we end up in court and somebody says what we did was an unreasonable act as against the procedure that should have been followed, you can then turn to the official record and say, well, this is the officially recorded vote. It actually comes up with the same answer. This isn't selecting it that way, but it's a defense against the claim that this other procedure is invalid and, by the way, thwarted anybody's will as expressed through the primary process. Two different things.
Yes.
So again, pending at this time is the question of one, what was the other party properly served? So will this lawsuit ever get off the ground? And then second, there were questions, threshold questions, they call them, about standing and other things that were also pending while they were still in front of the court.
Yeah.
This was insurance.
And
if the people suing, one on the question of standing, and one on the question of service, and whatever the other threshold questions were that they raised, I don't remember off the top of my head. Now you could go to this point, we'll say, well, it doesn't matter. All of that doesn't matter because we didn't use that anyway to pick the candidate.
Yeah.
We did it with Bernie saying, hey, let's nominate her. And everybody said yes.
And that one simple line that a lot of us didn't pay attention to, we were already upset. We already had this defeatist attitude because we've been through the ringer. And that's why it says, how much responsibility does Bernie Sanders bear with this case? Right there, he made that case moot.
Yep.
And that's why it's sue the burn, and he has a responsibility for it. Now, here's the other thing I just want to put up really quickly. We had a little money, a tip left over on Rumble Rants by Blank State, I believe it was. I want to make sure. Guys, help out today. Throw a few bucks in there. At whatever you make, I have to pay Don back in vodka. So please help on out.
He's going to need a lot of money.
It's Memorial Day, and for a lot of people, it's really a sad day. You did an amazing interview with Cindy Sheehan. We'll listen to it later on. Yeah. It's going to be on Don's YouTube. Will be on the radio later on today. But can you answer this question right here? And I can't even see it because it's so. If the primaries are illegitimate, the general elections are illegitimate.
Yeah.
All other political issues are a moot point until this was resolved. Better yet, publicly deny your consent for these circuses.
Okay,
thank you, Blake, for the tip, by the way.
Okay, so the assumption, there's good reasoning there. I don't disagree with that statement.
Yes,
but see, let's go back to virtual and real. What's actually happening? Because virtually, what's happening in a presidential election is that there's some process for selecting candidates, and then there's some process for choosing among the selected candidates to put that person in office, and that this is somehow related to the vote that people make. Okay, so I mean, there are so many steps in there that support everything that this person wrote. I agree. Let's start with, after all of that nonsense, if that were all straight and you went in and pulled the lever, we have no idea. Like when I pull it for this guy, what it prints over there. Okay. And so without that problem, we're already in trouble.
Well, before we get into that, because I think that's going to segue into the second section with this tweet and RFK and everything like that. Really pause really quick and let's just finish up this last part, because I know you're there and we'll go right into the second section. So we know how much responsibility Bernie Sanders bears with this case.
Yeah.
He is the Pied Piper of sorts. He made that case moot. Yeah. Just really quickly, and then we'll get on to the next section, because I know, and the chat is hot right now, and there's money in the. I see people leaving tips in the Rokfin. I appreciate that. Good. We're on 3 years demonetized on YouTube. They kneecapped us. We can't raise a dime over there, and it's just a shame that nobody's really sued freaking DNC, and they by acclamation do something to us, whatever the case may be. How does this case affect RFK's chance of becoming the nominee, and what could he do differently than Bernie Sanders? Because people are pointing to the specific case that we just showed right now. No. It wasn't about the DNC doing what it was. It was Bernie playing ball with the DNC, Don.
Yes.
Right. I mean, they probably could have got away with it if he didn't want to participate. But you saw Bernie Sanders bent the knee there. How does this reflect RFK? Because a lot of people are saying, I'm not going to support RFK despite him being a better candidate than Bernie is right now, which we should fucking mention in the next section, where people try to make, Bernie Sanders is the same thing. Bernie Sanders couldn't hold RFK's jockstrap. I didn't mean to be blunt, but that's the way I feel. RFK is way ahead at this point in time than Bernie ever was. Bernie was a compromise candidate. I don't want to get off track, but what could RFK do differently than Bernie Sanders in this case, and why people shouldn't use this particular case to not help or support or get behind RFK? Was that a loaded question?
I got it. You have to let me answer it the way I need to answer it.
You go ahead, man.
All right. So, you first have to ask yourself when you get involved in one of these campaigns in any fashion, whether it's to vote or not vote, to contribute or not contribute, or to boycott or organize a boycott, or to run for office yourself, or whatever. What exactly is the goal that I'm pursuing specifically in terms of policy or in terms of output, anyway, outcome.
Yeah.
And two, how does this particular act that I'm advocating or, advocating not impact on getting from here to there?
Are you saying the first questions are, in another sense, you have to understand what your expectations are? Are they realistic or not realistic?
No, you got to understand first of all, what do I actually want? I'm
Yeah.
going to do something. What's that going to make happen? And is that what I'm trying to accomplish, or do I want something here, but this is going to make this happen? It has nothing to do with it. You got to be clear on what's your goal, and then the acts that you commit, the things that you do, what things are set in motion, and does it move towards that goal, or does it set up further, roadblocks to getting to that goal, or is it completely irrelevant to that goal or something else? Just very simple things, really. And we're mystified with a lot of haze that comes through this political process. That's why I'm trying to set it up so people understand it as a virtual thing rather than as a real material thing. There's a lot of real material stuff that goes on in a political campaign. The money contributed, people, touring, going out on the road, interviews, media work, people get assassinated, all kinds of things actually happen in the real world. Policy, which is actual governing, is determined by a different process. Okay, that is something that you have to reckon with at the beginning of this. You might be involved in a circus, but the circus is never coming to the town that you're trying to get to. It's going to be, it might be fun, and you might have a whole lot of cool symbology. America's first black president, registered trademark. We finally broke the glass ceiling, registered trademark, etc. This policy of governing over here is completely unfazed by any of that. Just whether it's Bush or Obama, no peace prize, war criminal, peace prize, war criminal, war, murder, starvation. 9 million people will still die of starvation this year, almost a direct consequence of American foreign policy. No one in Congress will ever say that out loud, except at a fundraiser. And so we're talking about this election process as if it were part of the process of governing, when in fact it's not. And so you have to understand that first. Then you have to understand what this election process actually is, since it's not that. And one thing that it is a public discussion. It's a circus-like discussion, but it's a public discussion of apparent issues. As an example, in 2016, my friend Professor Anthony Montero and I were speaking regularly about, I would say from the middle of 2015 on, about the phenomenology of that election. How Sanders and Trump, both outsiders coming into the election, were looking at upsetting what looked like a dynasty election between Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. Okay, I was being interviewed by foreign media almost daily. And their angle, starting from like July or August of 2015, right up to Election Day, and well, first right up to the nomination to the conventions, was this dynasty. And, what's this Sanders guy? Isn't he that hippie guy from Vermont? And they all knew Trump, of course, because you're fired. And so I've been doing this stuff a really long time, almost 50 years now. And I live in New York, so I knew all about Donald Trump. And a matter of fact, I fought him right here in Westchester County on 2 different projects that he had licensed his name to, and he had come to do PR work for the developer, because I was fighting that developer here in my own community. And so I started going to his other projects, and Trump got involved in a couple of his other projects. So we banged heads. Okay. So they're asking me, well, what do you think about this? It's going to be Clinton and Bush, yes. And I'm like, well, it seems that way. It doesn't really matter. The policy is going to be the policy. People are going to yell at each other in red shirts and blue shirts or whatever. Everybody will be smug and self-satisfied at the end of it. And then ultimately one of those 2 groups will have the weeping and gnashing of teeth or whatever. And that's, round 2 and 4 years from now. And what about Donald Trump? And I would tell them, look, his main business, I don't know if it's the largest part of his income or not, but it's a substantial part of his income, is licensing his name. I had a group of investors who are developing a 1,000-unit apartment complex on the west side of Manhattan. And, we're going to luxury apartments for sale. And so let's say they're going to go for $1 million each. If I go to Trump and say, look, I'll give you $500,000 if you let me put your name on the building, so I can call it a Trump Tower or Trump Apartments or whatever, I know I'm going to get $1.2 million or $1.3 million for each of those 1,000 apartments instead of $1 million, just because his name is on it. That's the business that he is most lucrative, I think, for him. That's the business that most people in business know him for, licensing his name. And so when they're asking me this, I said, well, what I just said. And obviously, a run for president as a credible candidate enhances the value of his, name. It's his brand. It enhances the value of his brand. And that was it. That was all any of us thought. So all of a sudden, he starts running up in the polls. And first we're thinking, well, it must be because he's a celebrity. He's a TV star. People know him from like wrestling and Miss America or whatever, Miss Universe, and from the, whatever that is, the You're Fired TV show.
The Apprentice.
The Apprentice.
You're fired.
I'm fired.
You're fired for not knowing the name.
And so that was that. That's what I thought. And he runs up, and suddenly Sanders starts running up. So now I'm saying, Tony Montero, Professor Montero and I are talking. This may be September, October of 2015. And I'm expressing to him some of the same concerns. I'll admit, I'm a Marxist. I've been since I was in my teens, and that's whatever the hell that means to anybody. But I'm looking and I'm hearing from people. This is kind of a scary phenomenon. This is like a populist guy with a right wing sort of ideological perspective. He's sort of organizing old, unemployed, recently impoverished white workers who used to be factory workers and industrial workers, and now they have no hope and this and that. It seems like a setup for overt fascism. Is a little scary because of that. And this is what was being pumped out to everybody, of course, in the media. It still is. And every Democrat in Congress and your mayor and town council, whatever, if they have any awareness of things outside of their purview, that's the line. And so I said, I have these concerns, Tony. And Tony said, look, if Donald Trump is a fascist, what is Hillary Clinton? And I said, yeah, ha, ha, ha. And he said, no, it's a serious question. Examine the question. And when I did, I realized, of course, you're talking about the same phenomenon. So then he said, it doesn't matter what either of them are. They're functionaries, okay? And if you're going to look at it as a Marxist, what you have to look at is the phenomenology here. What is it that's lifting them up? And on top of that, why are they, these two insurgents who are speaking heresies, because Trump at this point had already said the first heresy, maybe NATO was obsolete. Nobody said that since NATO in the 1950s, early 1950s was formed. He said, you got to look at what is it in the masses, in the pop and the people that's lifting these people up. At the same time, by the way, that there are rebellions in the cities around the label Black Lives Matter. But Black Lives Matter was what was on people's lips and their T-shirts. But people's conditions, their sense of desperation, anger, and fear was what was driving their behavior, which were the same things that were driving the behavior of people who were lifting up Sanders and Trump. They were scared. They were already marginal, and they were looking at their already challenged, precarious position eroding further. People were saying, yeah, you lost your job to China. Guess what? You're never going to get it back. It's not coming back.
Yeah.
And they were moving forward with the TPP and the whatever the hell the other one was for Europe and all of this. So this phenomenon existed then, and we could see that it was separate from the electoral process, that this was the real thing. Well, the people were not ready for that. Sanders did what you saw. Some people said, well, I'm a Democrat, and Trump is the scariest thing I've ever seen. And so I'm going to have to vote for Hillary Clinton. And so a lot of them did. Some of them said, I'll never vote for her after what they did, and either voted for third-party candidates or wrote in, their grandmother, or some of them, enough of them, voted for Trump, and which was almost an act of affirmative rebellion. Yeah, I heard all the stuff he said about him. You know what? I don't give a damn. That's how mad I am. Pull. That's what the situation was among the voters.
Mm-hmm.
It had an impact. All right. First, one thing that followed from that was Trump got elected. Okay.
Yeah.
But Trump was not able to do any of the things that he was elected to do, or he didn't want to. However that happened,
Yeah.
the things he promised weren't delivered. And you can make a credible argument for either or both of them. It's either he didn't want to or he was thwarted. Lots of evidence, certainly of being thwarted. Also, I don't trust any of them, so it's a separate thing. All right, so now we're looking at a situation where people are running again. People are getting stirred up, and they're taking positions about who's this one and who's that one. But behind all of it is, again, the same idea that there's going to be a candidate who's going to be a savior, who we're going to, first of all, be able to get on the ballot. I don't see people sitting around like saying, hey, by the way, let's get this person or that person to be a candidate. They're presented to us, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's a passive role that we play already at our introduction.
Yeah.
Then we pick from among those people which one looks least likely to stab me and run me with a sword or whatever on the first meeting. And then they start to articulate things that sound like policy proposals, or perhaps even one or two there, and then the circus
keep going.
The circus goes up again. Well, this is where we're at. They're starting to appear. We got Ron DeSantis, you got Trump, you got Robert Kennedy and Williamson, and the host of others. What's his name that just announced? Tim Scott, and there's some others.
Yeah.
And they all have, their little cheering section, and they all have their little issues. This one with COVID, that one with the war here, they're just there, whatever. And people are lining up, expecting, I believe, and you'll see this, sort of become reified going forward, that supporting this one or that one and getting them through this process that apparently needs their participation and is going to reflect their will produce a candidate that has a chance at governing with the policies that you would like to see implemented. Forgetting that delusion, something is going to come out of this election process. Okay. Now,
Chip Walter says, by the way, that he believes that RFK may be running simply as a messenger candidate, like Sanders. Like he wants to get, on network TV and say the CIA killed my dad and get all these other messages out there. Also the message of censorship, which is one of his main things, Assange and stuff like that. So,
this is where,
bearing this in mind,
this is kind of where I'm going, but instead of not like Sanders. All right. The legacy of Sanders' messaging was one betrayal after another by him. Medicare was a big deal. Okay. The candidate he backed in that campaign would not give you Medicare, and his role, if you look at that thing that happened with Jimmy Dore with the M for all of that.
Yeah.
None of them. We're for a party that doesn't actually exist as a legal entity, as they plead in their own, under oath. They sure do hang together like a club.
That's true.
And so Sanders' messaging is, in essence, what was messaging like the Pied Piper's whistling is. It was to gather people. They heard something that sounds like something that they like. It sounds kind of like if I do all these different things, we might get him as president, and he might do some of them. And in fact, none of that was true. You can see his behavior since then in a million different things. And we had plenty of evidence of that fact during the campaign. For me, we discussed this a few times before. Who's Hugo Chavez? A dead communist dictator. Really? So I don't need to ask you anything else about your foreign policy. And if I'm not going to ask you anything else about your foreign policy on the assumption of what you just said there, you're the more dangerous to me than anybody that's going to go in there unless they have the same foreign policy. Because what you're going to do is attempt to continue American imperialism. American imperialism, like every imperialism that's ever come before, is reached this stage where it is so hungry and so matured that it has to eat its own legs to continue, another day. In other words, it's at a really dangerous stage. And if you're not going to confront that head on, you're basically going to take us toward that final war is really what it is. And we're seeing it now. It's already started. Okay, so I kind of went off on that a little bit. Here's the thing. There's going to be a campaign and there's going to be a conversation that's going to take place, particularly among the major party candidates that will be in front of the masses of people in the country. Whether they like it or not, whether they decide not to air it on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever, it's going to find its way out in front of the people. And if you have candidates who are talking some of the real heresies that are at the foundation of our existing of the empire now, that war is actually our war making is the source of our problems, that our poverty is from spending $1 trillion a year, $858 billion a year on the books, on weapons that can't be used, because if they are, we destroy the world. That to the extent they're being used, they're murdering hundreds of thousands of people every year. That because of the tensions and the reconfiguration of forces and things around the world, the global economy suffers a loss of almost 10 million people a year by starvation. Another God knows how many tens of millions of people for lack of health care, lack of water, sanitation, hospitals, housing, all these things, that if we don't take that money now, we're in deep trouble. Having two candidates saying that out loud in front of the people will reify these ideas that they hear from the fringes right now as actual facts that coincide with their own experience and what they see in front of them. That will be the side effect of having, say, for example, Robert Kennedy and Donald Trump as the candidates. Both of them will say the same thing about the war in Ukraine. They might have different ways of ending it. Both of them are going to want to end it now. I was particularly impressed with Kennedy when they asked him, will you support the nominee if it's Biden or Marianne Williamson or whatever her name is?
He said, I will not support it. I don't see myself supporting a candidate.
Any pro-war candidate.
Any pro-war candidate. Period. He did say that. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And that there's no doubt that Joe Biden is a pro-war candidate because he's been conducting a war since he got in.
Yeah.
They picked up.
He's been pushing war for 52 years now.
Okay. This particular war, he was when he was vice president, his desk was the center of of basically the coup that took over Ukraine in 2013, 2014. Yeah, it was well started. The Maidan started gathering again in November of 2013. John McCain, Richard Blumenthal, Victoria Nuland, all these American officials were over there.
We got a guest coming on in a little bit. We got to wrap this section up. In essence, what are you saying about this particular situation when it comes to RFK and people kind of reflecting that he can't win anyways? It seems like winning isn't defined in your mind as actually gaining power and actually implementing the policy of the people. What does winning actually mean in your mind as far as him running?
Okay. Many of the objective conditions for revolution in the United States or for the termination of the U.S. directed empire anyway exist. An impoverishment of the masses, immiseration of the working class, the dissolution more or less of the middle class. You have half the people don't have $1,000 or $400 or whatever that number is in the bank.
Gotcha.
So those things exist. The problem is the level of political education, the level of understanding of the political process and of the political forces and things around the world in the United States is practically at an infantile level. And we've
gone backwards.
Well, people they're not educated to understand the essence of these things. No, the things I've been telling you right now,
not educated.
People don't know that. Number two, the actual facts that occur outside of my life. I know I am having trouble paying the bills. I know there's no job out there for my kid. I know it's been getting worse for the last 40 or 50 years. I don't know that that's the condition facing everybody. Because I was raised to believe if there's a failing in my ability to provide for my family, it's my failure.
Yeah.
I'm inadequate somehow. And people have that kind of an understanding of things. If you have people speaking about this publicly because they have to, because they've run out of every other bullshit conversation they can come out with, and no matter what they intend to do, if they have to actually start speaking about reality, it elevates the level of education of the masses, and it helps to move the masses to a point where not only do I know things are bad, I know something can be done about it, and I'm starting to think about what. And that's what I think you would get out of having Kennedy and Trump as candidates, because you'd be talking about the press lies, the agencies are all co-opted. You know, Bobby Kennedy speaking about not only something, an open secret that we've all known, the CIA killed my father and my uncle, and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Fred Hampton and a host of others. From most people in this country who suspected that, to hear a Kennedy say that, for example, is going to shake the foundations of their understanding of things. To hear him say the CIA now is a captured agency. Forget that he said most of the agents and people at the CIA are people of goodwill and attention, patriotic Americans and all that. First of all, you have to say that crap. A lot of them vote, by the way.
A lot of the people become a cop, become a CIA. They believe in the marketing, Don.
Okay.
They believe in the marketing.
I'm there because of that. I'm a patriot.
I mean, come on.
So, but the reality that he describes is this agency has been captured, the management of it, and its purpose, its function is to provide wars. This is what he said, is to provide wars for the arms manufacturers to be able to get big bucks through the Pentagon, period. That is their job, he said. You know, and going from agency to agency to agency, Kennedy knows these things from litigating with these agencies.
He's been going on to all the special interest agencies, right?
So he's got like chapter and verse for that, and that'll be his campaign. This is going to be an education for people. I don't care what he intends to do. I don't care what they'll let him do. This moves us forward. Because if it's not him, it's going to be somebody singing, you know, hallelujah or whatever. And the same thing is going to happen policy-wise anyway. This is what we have to work with. What do we do with it? And it's the same thing with Trump. You know, maybe he actually did a couple of things that were constructive, like not doing the TPP and some other things. But the main thing, people now openly acknowledge and understand, and even the polling data reflects it, our media lies. Our media is, to use the clinical language of political science, full of shit. Okay. And that is a product of whatever. I don't care why he did that, what his intention was, what he thought the outcome would be. The people here have to know that. And now a lot of them do as a consequence of hearing it. And so
from Trump saying that shit. Now and Bobby does the same thing. Does he not? Does he not bring the same discussions to the table? He elevates, he educates. I mean, if we didn't have Bobby Kennedy running in this situation, we would have who? Nothing. What would the discussions coming out from the left be? It'd be blah.
Well, there's no left, first of all. We're talking about the Democratic Party.
The American left.
If Bobby Kennedy
wasn't running.
It wasn't running. We'd be looking at a replay of 2020. You got Biden. They'll come out and drool, and they'll, maybe put a mat behind him so it looks like he's awake or something. You got Kamala Harris, who will babble in some other babble language, whatever he just babbled. And then you have Marianne Williamson. She'll maybe come do your wedding too, and to help you smell the right aromatics and whatever other wacky stuff they do. You wouldn't. First, to go to Trump on I mean, not to me, the most important thing, the existential question right now is the war with Russia that we are engaged in, including an attempted hit on the president of the Russian Federation in the Kremlin 3 or 4 weeks ago. Okay, people don't realize the significance of this thing in the big picture. To have Trump said in the 2016 campaign something that no one said since Harry Truman was president. Wouldn't it be nice? And isn't it possible for us to not have the Russians as enemies, but to work with them and make money together? Wouldn't that benefit everybody? And isn't that possible? And I know I can work that out with the president of Russia. And here, him saying that was evidence that he was a puppet of Russia because, of course, no, it's not possible.
Yeah.
That's the extent of the political discourse in this country. And when you start to have heresies come into that discourse, the knowledge that people have deep-seated that, in fact, that is the case gets reified.
Yeah.
And again, the level of political consciousness of the working class of the masses in this country is elevated.
I think that right there. Say that last line again because that's the most important thing.
Yeah, what we're trying to do raise the consciousness of the masses.
So I've said this before, Don. I'm not supporting Don. I'm not voting for RFK. I'm not sending him money. I'm not supporting him. But I'm very thankful of his campaign because the things he's talking about, it's raising the political discourse, and we need that more than anything. The hell with the results that we know we're going to be BS. We need the discussion raised over here, ladies and gentlemen, because if we don't have these discussions, they just go away.
Right.
People forget. We live in the United States of amnesia. And with a guy who comes out and wearing my WikiLeaks shirts and says, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pardon Assange. That's not just about Julian Assange.
That's right.
That's about freedom of speech.
Well, and
that's about a freedom of a press. That's about pushing back against censorship. Go ahead.
It's also about a lot of people hearing that for the first time are like, who's Julian Assange? And they go, look. And that's a big effect of having that conversation. That's my point. The media has been literally totalitarian since Reagan was president.
Yeah.
Certainly since Bush #1 started the war in Iraq. If you remember all of the media, machinations around that, and then most certainly since the '96 Telecom Act, and then most certainly since 9/11. If you remember that there was one TV show on all the channels from CBS, NBC, CNN, all the way to HBO, Showtime, and even pay-per-view, had the same show on for like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. So winning is defined differently, I think. I think when we have these discussions and we get them back in, I know you got to be excited because you're older than me. What are you, 52 now? 2 years old? You're a little bit older than me, but you can remember a time. I think we're moving backwards. When I heard JFK do a speech in 1963 about peace, I was like, at American University, right? And I changed my speech up to kind of emulate that because it was so relevant today.
Yeah, that was good.
But we're not having those conversations anymore, and that's what's just driving me crazy. So I think we have to look at RFK running as something different. If your expectations are, oh, he can't win, so it's moot. He can't gain power. He can't put policy in play, so it makes no difference. It's just a sham. I think you're wrong. I think elevating this conversation is really important. What did you see? You saw something you liked?
I saw somebody said the first Gulf War was shown on TV almost around the clock, which is true. I remember that, right?
Yeah.
And
now in Russia,
now the war with Russia,
crickets.
Nobody says nothing because the story is anti-factual.
Yeah.
It's absurd. It's almost like psychotic absurd.